Good morning. We know that prayer is going to help us in these difficult last days, but so will daily Bible reading. As it says in Philippians 4 and verse 8, fill your minds with everything that is true, noble, good and pure, everything that we love and honour. The reason being that what we read in the scriptures will go into our minds, and God can bring these up from the dark recesses of our minds to help us in difficult situations. For example, if we suffer from lack of food towards the end, we can remember the widow of Zarephath, whose jar of oil and the jar of flour didn't run out. Wasn't luxury food, but it was enough to keep her going. Our faith in that will help us. But Bible reading can be a bit daunting, especially for the beginner. It might seem a bit boring, but if we look at some of the stories, they're anything but boring. And the story I'd like to look at today is Belshazzar's feast, and it's in Daniel chapter 5. Now, Belshazzar was a ruler in Babylon, a very powerful kingdom, extremely powerful. And so Belshazzar's position was so high up that he became extremely haughty. But he decided he was going to throw a party. And he gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his noblemen. And of course his wives, and it says here his singing women came as well. What they were, I don't know, they're probably concubines. As the wine began to flow, Belshazzar ordered that the temple vessels which Nebuchadnezzar had looted when he destroyed Jerusalem, that these vessels should be brought in so that he and his party could drink from them, which was a horrible thing to do. But worse than that, they used them in worshipping their gods of wood and metal, just lumps of wood and metal. So unintelligent. Now, in the middle of all this, a hand appears on the wall and starts to write. It's a bit gloomy, so this hand which appeared would be a bit frightening. And it says here, this is what happened to the king. It says that he turned pale with alarm, his thigh joints went slack, and his knees began to knock. Well, I'm not surprised. It's enough to give anybody a heart attack. But of course nobody can understand this writing that's on the walls, so they look for the magic practicing priests to come and explain. Of course they can't. But the Queen Mother remembers that Daniel is able to interpret these things. So Daniel is brought in, and the king says to him, look, if you can explain these words to us, you will be dressed in purple and have a chain of gold put round your neck, and you will become third in the kingdom. Daniel says, keep your gifts. He doesn't want them, but he can interpret the writing on the wall. But before he does so, he says to Belshazzar, your father became extremely haughty in his governing of the kingdom of Babylon. It says that his heart grew swollen with pride and stiff with arrogance. And because of that, God brought him down, and for 7 years Nebuchadnezzar lived like an animal with this mental disease, until he learnt that God is the one who tolerates human rulership just for the moment. So Daniel says to Belshazzar, you knew all this, you knew what happened to your father, but you didn't learn the lesson. So then he goes on to explain the meaning of the writing on the wall. The writing was Mene, Mene, Tekel and Parsin, as you know. And the explanation is that God has measured Belshazzar's sovereignty and put an end to it, that he had been weighed in the balance and found wanting, and that his kingdom had been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Well, Daniel gets clothed in purple and is given a gold chain, etc. But it's of no use to him, because that night the Medes and Persians overthrow the kingdom of Babylon and they take over the rulership, and Belshazzar is no more. Well, there's various lessons we can learn there. Obviously, we don't want to become above ourselves. We're just ordinary people. We're nothing special. We're loved by God, which is the most wonderful thing. But if we keep humble, we'll stay in God's love. But if we read on in the book of Daniel, that's Daniel chapter 6, you can read of Daniel in the lion's pit, and it's an exciting story. There's nothing boring about it. So in order to encourage, especially beginners, to read the Bible every day, I'll write below some of the verses where you can find these interesting stories, and it might get us into the habit. And for those of us that have left Watchtower, maybe we've got out of the habit of reading the Bible, but let's do it every day to keep our faith strong in the face of those many people around us who have lost their faith. But thanks for watching this morning.